Welcome, everybody. We are going to wait a few minutes before we get started, but definitely introduce yourself in the chat function with your name and school and where you're from. Kara, good to see you. I'm glad you were able to come. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes to get started because I know we've got a few more people who've signed up or are probably just getting out of school. So, but while we're waiting, if you can make sure that we've got your name correct and anything else you'd like to put. Good. Well, I think I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Delia Clark, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our Take It Outside series. This webinar is a learning series for educators. It's made possible by a partnership of the Iditarod Historic Trail Alliance, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Anchorage Park Foundation. And under normal conditions, the Iditarod Trail to Every Classroom program takes place over the span of an entire school year. But as we all know, this is not a normal school year. And so we've developed and are offering this virtual series. We're hoping to return to a more usual format soon in the future. I just wanted to let you know that we are offering one UAA graduate credit for participating in this series. We also are collecting a list of people who might like to participate in the future and normal sessions. So if you're interested in any of those things, you can email itrecalaska@gmail.com, ITREC Alaska@gmail.com, and you can get information about graduate credits and everything else. Coming up, and I'll repeat this at the end, but we've got three more parts of the series in February. February 8th is Exploring Nature with Your Senses. February 16th is Using Outdoor Classrooms, taking place at Wolverine Park in Anchorage. And February 23rd is Nature Journaling. So with no further ado, I want to introduce tonight's session, which we're really excited about. Marshall Welch is joining us from Portland, Oregon, and he has been part of the iTrek full year series pretty much since the inception. I think maybe 10 years, a decade. And before that, he was working with the Appalachian Trail to Every Classroom program. He's had a lot of roles professionally. He's including Assistant Vice Provost for Engagement at St. Mary's College in California, Director of Community Service Center at University of Utah. He's taught a lot of courses on service learning, and as well as the work he's done with our programs. He has a doctorate in special ed and also a doctorate of ministry. And he's really interested in studying the spirituality of service learning. And he and his wife have written a book about gardening as a metaphor for your own spiritual development called Tending the Garden, which I keep meaning to buy, and now I'm really going to have to do it because I said it out loud. So, Marshall, with no further ado, welcome. So glad you could join us.
Great. It is so great to be here. Let me know when I can, there we go. I'll grab my screen here. We're doing the technical part here. And it should be popping up there. Good. All right. I am so glad to be here with everyone. Like we said just a minute ago, I've been up there a number of times, love it. But I've got to say my hat goes off to all of you teachers for investing time and energy and effort into this amazing, wonderful project. And on top of that, you're dealing with the pandemic. My goodness, you just amaze me, and I'm blessed and honored and privileged to be here with you today. And I'm betting I'm the only thing standing between you and dinner. So you're even braver than that, okay? Oops, let's, my screen is not, there it goes. All right, you heard the quick introduction. I've been doing this for a while, and gosh, 15 so years ago, Rita Hennessy on the Appalachian Trail took this workshop at Michigan State University, and it is a half-day workshop with a lot of getting up and down, moving around, and we're trying to condense it into 90 minutes here today. And then Annette came and saw us working there in West Virginia and invited me to come up to work with this group. So I just love being a part of this and seeing the projects. One of the projects that stands out to me is in Seward, the kids did water samples with science, and they ended up influencing policy in the city government. And I just think that's the epitome of civic education. And so, like I said, I'm just so pleased to be a part of all of this. We're going to spend some time to start off just with a quick overview about terms and principles regarding service learning and reflection. And the reason we need to have a little background information is 20 years ago, I had a very skewed assumption about both of those things. And I quickly learned many things as I started dabbling in this. I was dubious, self-disclosure, I was dubious about this reflection thing. I thought it was going to be touchy-feely, but I'm a convert, and I have found it to be a powerful learning and teaching tool. And what we're going to go over today is practical. It's stuff you can use tomorrow. The other thing is I want this to be as interactive as possible. And I'm busy looking at my slides and I can't really see the whole gallery. So I'm counting on Annette and Olivia and to give me a heads up if anybody has a question, okay? So here we go. The information that I'm going to be presenting here cuts across all these ages and grades. You're going to need to adapt it to your situation and need, but I can tell you that based on what I've been doing with the folks up there in Alaska and on the Appalachian Trail, I know that teachers are using this and it's working with kindergartners all the way up to grad school, but you're going to have to tweak it to fit your context and need. So to start, I'm inviting you to jot down on a piece of paper, index cards, something. You're not going to turn this in, you're not graded on it. I want you to just write down your definition of reflection in just a few seconds. Hold on to it because we're going to use it in just a minute. So we're going to have some dead space here, dead air as you write that. I should bring up my Jeopardy theme music that I usually play when I do this workshop. So just spend a couple of seconds writing down your definition of what reflection might be. All right, get that last little lick in there. Hold on to it. We are going to come back to it in just a little bit. Next, I'd like you to share what you've written. This is when you can, let me back out there, unmute and somebody volunteer, be brave, volunteer and share with us your definition of reflection. Anybody jump in?
I had basically like a mirror, seeing yourself or seeing, you know, an object back at you.
Beautiful. Very concrete. Reflection, mirror. I'm with you. Okay. Thank you, Kara. Okay. Anybody else? One or two other ones?
I had coming back to.
Go ahead, Tumi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, coming back to an experience, trying to better understand what really happened or how it worked.
Very good. Coming back to an experience and understand how it worked. Thank you very much. Let's hear one or two more.
I was going to say, taking your personal views on how a situation or experience impacted you as a result of your learning or being changed from that experience.
Okay, very good. I was listening intently to your definition along with the others, and you added a really important component in there, okay? But one more, anybody brave enough to share? I want to interact as best we can over the miles in this virtual platform.
guess I'll jump in. I put thinking back and letting your mind summarize what your experience taught you.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for sharing. Well, guess what? You have all just completed a pre-flexion activity that we're going to talk about. We're going to unpack it in just a little bit. Stay tuned. You're all now experts in pre-flexion and you didn't even know it. Reflection in service learning is a lot like tending a garden. You know, if you go into the kitchen drawer and pull out a bag of seeds for green beans and just go out in the backyard and stick them in the dirt and walk away hoping that it's going to grow, you might be in for a surprise a few weeks down the road because you're going to have to contend with weeds. You've got to water it. You've got to, you know, just tend to it to really make sure that it's growing and blossoming. And that's the same thing with service learning. If we plop kids down out into the community and cross our fingers that they're actually going to learn something doing some service, it's a lot like just plopping a seed in the ground and hoping it blossoms and grows. Reflection is part of that tending to their learning, because it can actually be a scary thing as well as a wonderful thing. And so we have to accompany our students as we're going through all this. Want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Here's a definition of service learning that comes from the National Youth Leadership Council. It's an educational method that combines elements of experiential education with community service. It involves youths as resources to their schools and communities as they apply academic skills to community needs, opportunities with the support of adult learners. I want to be really clear. This is not volunteering. Doing the service in an educational context like this is no more optional or voluntary than other teaching and learning assignments, like taking a test or writing a paper. In fact, when I work with college professors on this, I urge them not to use the V word, because there's kind of a dynamic that happens when we consider our students volunteering, and it kind of gives them some slack and unrealistic expectations that they're not really accountable for what it is they're doing. So it's not the same thing as volunteering. And the definition goes on to point out that reflection is the key to growth and understanding. Young people use critical and creative thinking to ensure that the learning makes sense and has meaning. Oh, this part's underlined and in italics. Must be important. Reflection activity should be used before, during, and after the service experience to assess where students are in the learning process. It helps them internalize the learning and provide opportunities for them to voice concerns and share feelings and evaluate the project. And the methods that I'm going to share with you today tries to capture all of that. When we're looking at service learning, it's really a triangulation of three things: the head, where we're studying and learning; the hands, the action and application of what we're learning; and reflection is the critical consideration here in the heart. This is where wisdom takes place. Knowledge is up here, wisdom is down here. As we operationalize place-based service learning, there's a 5-letter mnemonic device that can help all of us remember what's happening here. O stands for objectives, what it is we want our students to learn and accomplish in the experience, but it's really objective squared because the community partner also has objectives. The next letter in OPERA is P, partnerships. We're working with community partners to help them meet a specific goal as well. And that's when the engagement takes place. You and your students are applying your hands to integrate what you're talking about in the classroom out in the real world to make a difference. And along the way, we pause, hit the pause button and do some reflection before, during, and after the engagement. And when all that's said and done, we assess. We come back and ask ourselves, did we meet the objectives of the classroom and the community partner? Here's an example from 6th grade coming from Alaska. The objectives were to integrate the scientific method with math and environmental studies and develop and improve the trail around the school and the city. The partners were BLM, City Parks, and the Iditarod Trail Alliance. The students were engaged by conducting research and implementing best practice for trail maintenance to help reduce runoff, and mud management. And they used a technique that you're going to learn about today in reflection called what, so what, now what. And in the end, they did a pre-post evaluation of the trail condition and the partner satisfaction and a final quiz to determine whether or not they met those objectives. So reflection, here's our operational definition, in addition to the great ideas you shared with me earlier. This comes from Bob Bringle and Julie Hatcher, and it is succinct and right to the point. It is the intentional consideration, and I heard a lot of that concept in the things that you folks shared earlier. The intentional consideration of an experience in light of particular learning objectives. So this isn't just some willy-nilly pondering. We're sitting down and really thinking about what's happening here. Here's what I'd like you to do with the definition you wrote down. Compare your definition with what you wrote down with this definition here. The intentional consideration of an experience in light of learning objectives. What does your definition say, include or not include? Would anybody like to share? This is in no way a criticism. This is just a reflection process. How does your notion of reflection compare with this one?
So, I just looked at mine and you brought it up first, as mine was more concrete, and it wasn't abstract at all. I was literally thinking of a mirror.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Kara. Anybody else?
Well, mine didn't have the specifically the learning objectives stated. It was just kind of more vague and in general, that it's based upon a situation, your personal views and how they're impacted or affected over time based upon that experience.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Carol. One more. Anybody else want to share?
Yeah, I looked at my original one as looking back at something, where this looks more like you're in the process, you're in the moment rather than looking back.
Okay, good. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Okay. So before we move on, let me ask you this. Is there a difference between a report and reflection? Because a lot of times I ask teachers and college professors, do you do reflection? And they'll say, oh yeah, I have my students write a report. So I'm asking you, are they the same thing or is there a difference? Would anybody like to chime in here?
There's definitely a difference. A report can be factual, but not necessarily have any information on how you saw it and interpreted it personally. Okay. It's kind of more of a kind of stands alone, as opposed to a reflection has that personal piece of impact, I think.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Yeah, reports tend to be objective, scientific kind of thing. Thanks, Carol. Anybody else want to chime in?
I was going to use the word subjective, just like instead of objective, it's more subjective for that reflection, depending on everybody's particular background and past experiences.
Okay, good. Thanks, Alex. Let me ask you another question related to this. Who's the primary audience in a report? Is it an external audience or an internal audience?
External.
Yeah, okay? And that's fine. We all have to report to a board or to a government agency or to a boss, something like that. And reflections is primarily an internal introspection, and some of you alluded to this. Now, maybe the secondary audience is external, being a teacher or a community partner. But the big difference here is the internalization that takes place in reflection. Good job. So I also want to make sure we understand that critical reflection is not the same as what I call warbling. Warbling ends up being Dear Diary entries. And this was my first horrible experience doing reflection with college students. Dear Dr. Welch, I'm tutoring the kids at the Guadalupe Center and it's really cool. Week later, Dear Dr. Welch, I'm still tutoring the kids at the tutoring center and it's still cool. Dear Dr. You know, you just, oh, yeah, I was getting Dear Diary entries. Or my college students would try to get inside their professor's head and go, what does he want? How can I impress him? And I would get these warm fuzzies of things like, I'll never be the same. I'm so blessed from this experience, Dr. Welch. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got to help these people. They're so happy. And you'll notice there's a red flag on the screen. When we get those kind of comments, it's time to step back and either privately or in class, diplomatically, question some of our assumptions about power and privilege. And that's a critical aspect of reflection that can bubble up and you're not expecting it. So critical reflection is really looking at so what and now what? It's a constructive and critical examination of the self, society, and the experience itself. And it allows our students, even kindergartners, to recognize the complexity of the issues and the actions that we're all involved with. Service learning reflection can go beyond our technical definition that we just went over to include things like assessing student growth. It can be a teaching tool. It can integrate theory and practice. It integrates knowledge into personal life and action. And it's also considering service learning in the bigger picture and helps us as teachers question our own knowledge and understanding. And I have a story about that coming up a little bit later. Now, I'm obliged to let you know that the strategies I'm going to show you here this evening are all theoretically based. This can't just be something that I pulled off of, you know, Oprah. It's based on John Dewey, Kolb's learning cycle, Donald Schoen's learning ladder of reflection, Yates and Jonas levels of transcendence, and I always say this wrong, Hondiganu and Sotelo Raskoff's 3 dimensions of reflection. Trust me, they're in there. You'll see them as we move through this. Here's the simplest conceptualization of the theoretical premise and foundation. We do, and this reflects the scientific method. You do something, you stop and wonder, what just happened? What were the results? And then you go, well, so what? What do these results imply? And how did I influence this? And now what do I do? What will I or we do differently next time? And we go back and do it. This is what reflection entails. See, that's all for theory. I'm not going to hit you with any more theory. It's like, give me something now, Marshall. I need something I can use tomorrow. By the way, a quick sidebar. I was at a conference in San Francisco. It was a theology conference. And I was walking into my room to get ready to do my presentation. And the man who had just finished was packing up his computer. And he goes, oh, I'm finishing up. I'll be out of the way. I go, no worries, no hurry. That's fine. We're cool. And he looked at me and he goes, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but didn't you do a presentation or workshop at such and such university about reflection using what he called the ABCs, what we're going to call as head, heart, and hands? And I said, yes, I did. And he goes, I use that in all my classes with all my students. Thank you so much. Point of that sidebar story is, even though this is theoretically based, you can apply it and use it in your classes tomorrow. Reflection, huh? Oh, you mean journaling, right? Well, that was Rita's assumption back on the Appalachian Trail. But when she finished this workshop, she realized there's no single way to conduct reflection. Yes, it might include journaling, but it might also involve mixing and matching objectives in different formats that accommodate different learning styles. We all go into this with an assumption of what it is. And so I'm hoping tonight we can explore some different approaches to all of this. The objectives of reflection are for academic and cognitive growth, applying skills, critical thinking, and articulating a position through civil discourse. Tell me that's something we need these days. Personal development, promoting citizenship, and integration of theory and practice. Here's what I want you to think about. I want you to take just a few seconds for a quick brain dump and list on a piece of paper all the formats and methods of reflection you can think of. You have 30 seconds. Ready, go. I'm going to check in with you here in about 30 seconds. Okay, get that last lick in. What did you come up with? Let's start. Somebody be brave. Unmute. Rattle off your list real quick. Let's see what we came up with.
Pictures, memories.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Anybody else?
I had nonverbal, like a thumbs up, agreeing with different statements and different experiences.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Somebody else?
Graffiti wall and opinion lineup.
Okay, so what was the last one?
Opinion lineup.
Oh, opinion lineup. Great, thank you. These are really good ideas. You guys have some things in your hip pocket ready to use, okay? We're gonna come back to those in just a second. There's all kinds of reflection formats. There's oral reflection, there's written reflection, there's arts and multimedia, there's large group, there's small group, there's simulation and activities, individual reflection, and out of class reflection. So again, there's not just one way to do this stuff. Here's another think about for you. I want you to take another 30 seconds for a very quick brain dump on the pros and or cons to conducting reflection. Okay, you ready? Go. Some of the challenges, some of the benefits. Okay, get that last lick in. What did you come up with? What are some of the pros and cons of doing reflection based on what our assumptions and knowledge of what it is right now? Anybody?
Well, it puts the learning in focus, in context. They can better digest what they did as a pro. Cons, sometimes you're pressed with time. Like, do I really have time for that?
Time, that's like at the top of the list for disadvantages and challenges. Thank you. Anybody else?
It can be really humbling, especially if you are reading some of their feedback and it's like, wow, I really missed it on that. My objective wasn't as clear as I thought it was, or I guess you have to kind of be willing to look at some of the negative feedback as well as positive feedback.
Right, thank you, Carol. That's when we talk about it becomes a teaching tool. It allows us to reflect on, maybe I didn't do such a hot job going over that topic. Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I put down as a pro that it forces people to think about their own opinions.
Okay, think about your opinion. Thank you, Brian. One more. A downside.
I think that they're really highly personal. Then some people may not care about your particular take on it.
Yep. Thank you, Alex. That's a biggie. People are nervous, could be scared to do this. And so we need to create an atmosphere and condition where it's safe to share our feelings. And some of the techniques we're going to talk about today allows that to happen. You've got some great things on your list here. Let's see if we can come up with a few more here. Pros and cons. Talkers dominate. I'm betting money you got a kid in your room who's always talking about everything, right? And you just wish you could put a sock in their mouth sometimes, but that, can't do that. Conversely, you've got shy students who don't say a word. You're halfway through the school year and you've never heard their voice, okay? It does take up time from other activities. Somebody mentioned that. Here's something that nobody mentioned, but how do you assess and grade, especially a large group, okay? Now, an advantage to a large group, it's very efficient. Everybody's hearing the same thing and you get a lot of different perspectives and ideas. Small groups allow you to address some of the issues of the larger groups that came up, and then you can reconvene in a larger group to get reports from all the small groups. But again, time is a factor. Written reflection allows students to really contemplate their ideas, but the flip side of that is that can diminish spontaneity, and sometimes it's just good to brain dump. Written can be long, it can be short. It can be quick responses on index cards that can be circulated, and longer reflection provides deeper responses as well as confidentiality. Written response allows you to have a dialogue on paper with your students. I've had some profound conversations with students in their written journals, very meaningful and private conversations that I was privileged for them to share with me. But large classes take more time if you're doing that. But written reflection can also take place out of class as a homework assignment. You can have threaded discussions as well, but you have to sometimes set guidelines as you're having these conversations. Some of the other challenges, you get lack of depth and richness, you get Dear Diary, you get venting and warbling and radio talk show, lack critical thinking. So we also have to find methods that match our students' learning styles. And on top of that, we've got to assess their reflections and to see if they're actually growing. Stay tuned. All right, that's the overview. We're moving into part 2 of methods of reflection. There's no right or best method, and you don't have to use any of these if you don't want to. But I will say these are tried and true and easy to use. They can be combined and modified for various formats, all right? Some work better in some situations and demographic than others. Reflection can be a teaching and a learning tool, and it's not just for service learning. So here we go. Fasten your seatbelts. We're going to look at preflection. We've already done that. Graffiti, someone actually mentioned that a while ago. Head, heart, and hands, what, so what, now what, and take a stand. I'm hoping we can get through all these. We'll see how far we get. Now, before we get in there, I want to introduce you to something that you may not know the name of or be familiar with it, but it's Bradley's gradient assessment method. I love this. I use it in all my classes, and it's basically a 3-point scale. A level 1 response gets 1 point because it's a very cursory discussion without elaboration of why or how. It's just kind of a quick and dirty answer. Level 2 gets 2 points. There's slightly deeper observation, but it's still limited in context application. It may not have everything you're looking for. So it gets 2 points, and level 3 is at the top. It's complex application, understanding, and articulation, and they covered all the bases. And so you give 3 points for those rich, in-depth responses, 2 for marginal, 1 for cursory, like, yeah, you mentioned it, but I don't really know. I'm not really sure that you get it. And they get 0 points for no discussion. And we'll practice this as we go. Some rationale for why we give points to reflection and some cautions. When you add points, I guarantee you it will increase the depth of responses. When I used to just have my students reflect with no points, I got Dear Diary entries. The minute I started adding 3 points to it, all of a sudden it seemed to matter a little bit more, and they started investing a little time, thought, and energy. Keep in mind, and someone alluded to this, I think it might have been Alex a while ago, students might freak out for getting a grade to reflect because their assumptions of what reflection is. If they think it's group hugs and singing Kumbaya, they're going to freak out. But that's not what this is. This is critical consideration of an experience in light of learning objectives. And there's always a degree of subjectivity to assessment, as we will soon see. And lastly, the last caveat here is the scoring procedures that I'm showing you here focus on content, not spelling, grammar, and syntax. I know I had a junior high English teacher kind of lose it when we got to this part, but I'm focusing on content here, okay? So the first method is preflection, and we've already done this. That's when I asked you to take a piece of paper and write down your definition of reflection. It's powerful, it's simple, it's easy to use, it's grounded in constructivist theory because we're activating the learner's existing knowledge and prior experience. You can use it at the beginning of anything. You can ask students to write down what they think they're going to learn. That could be in a journal or a written paper. You can ask them what they want to learn. You can ask them what they're excited or anxious about. Quick 2 sidebar conversations. I took 21 college students to post-Katrina New Orleans. We're sitting on the basement floor of a church the night before we start gutting houses. And I handed out a bunch of scrap paper about like this. 2 sheets. The first one was, what are you excited about? Everyone wrote. They threw it down the pile in the middle of the floor, and then we all went in, grabbed one, and read them aloud anonymously. Okay? The second one, what are you nervous or anxious about? Right. They threw it down into the pile. We drew a sheet out, and to my surprise, so many students were nervous about using power tools. They were nervous about snakes. They were nervous about spiders. None of those things had crossed my mind. So it gave me insight as to where my students were in their comfort level as we began to gut houses in the 9th Ward of New Orleans. The other thing I like to do with my students at the beginning of the course is to write a letter to themselves, telling me what they think is going to happen, what they want to happen, what they're excited about, and what they're nervous about. And at the end of the course or semester, I return those letters so they can reflect on just how far they've grown in that period of time. So I like to collect and keep and redistribute them and reflect down the road. That's an option. Sometimes in a class, you can focus on an objective or a specific academic focus, where you write down thoughts or a definition of a key concept, like, what is the definition of reflection? You circulate the definitions, have the kids walk around, pass and exchange, look around, and they pair up and share definitions and share what they've learned. That way they can see, oh, there are some other similar ideas like mine, and there's some new things I never thought about. They discover new perspectives and similar understandings, and you can collect some baseline data on this. But by having them revisit their understanding and presumptions and assumptions after the experience. You could possibly use the 3-2-1 scoring procedure, or simply use a dichotomous scoring of 1 and a 0. Their assumption or definition was right, or they are off the mark. Now, that's not necessarily to give them a grade. It's to come back and check in with them later and see if there's a change. And you can calculate a percentage rate as kind of a little quick and dirty pre and post survey. Let's try it. You still have your reflection definition. And if we use our official operational definition, take a look at your definition and see how it compares with the definition of reflection is the intentional consideration of an experience in light of learning objectives. And how would you score your definition? Would you give it a 3, a 2, a 1? What do you think? Anybody want to share?
Maybe a 1 or 2.
Okay. Alan, was that you? Why did you say a 1 or a 2?
Just because it's just, again, the subjectivity of it. They somewhat line up, but not really well. Again, I put that it was emotionally or mentally reviewing an activity or action. I was looking at it, again, as reviewing, reflecting back, not reflecting on what you're really doing right now.
But see, for you, that is really good academic reconnaissance. Now you can look at your definition with the official operational definition from the textbook, and you have a sense of what this student knows and doesn't know, and how you're going to frame the rest of the discussion, okay? So this is how it becomes a teaching tool as well. So as I'm looking at definitions, I'm looking for 2 key concepts: the intentional consideration and learning objectives, and to what extent that's elaborated. So there's pros and cons in this approach of pre-reflection. It's good baseline, but it's even a better catalyst for discussion and planning your instruction. So that's just something for you to keep in mind. All right, here's some possible application examples in your context. You might ask your students, what are you excited or nervous about in preparing for a hike on the Iditarod Trail? What is the Iditarod Trail all about, and why is it important? How can the Iditarod Trail help us grow as persons or as citizens? Or you might have a series of vocabulary words and concepts associated with the trail, like serum run, or overflow, or roadhouse, and have them write these down and pre-reflect what their understanding is. I'm curious, as we've talked about this in the last 10 minutes, are the gears turning for any of you of how you might use pre-reflection, or how you've used this and didn't know it? Anybody want to share? I really wish I was there in the room with you and we could have a great conversation on this. Anybody? Initial thoughts about this pre-reflection idea?
I really like the pre-reflection idea. I generally do a post-reflection. And I've done like a KWL chart with kids in the past, like what do you know coming in on a topic? What would you like to learn? But this is kind of, you're calling it pre-reflection, which is new to me, but I like kind of getting their feelings, like, are they excited? Are they nervous? What concerns do they have kind of going into it? I like that. And so it helps me, I think, as an educator to not be blindsided by something that I could know about ahead of time.
Yep, that blindsiding is going to happen. The second thing is when you share it anonymously, they're all going, oh, good, I'm not the only one, Anybody else? A real quick comment before we move on? Okay, we'll let the gears turn. All right, let's move on. We're now going to talk about graffiti, and somebody, I don't remember who it was, actually mentioned this. Graffiti is a public response to a topic. It's effective with a two-sided issue, but it doesn't have to be always used that way. Basically, you're putting poster paper up on the wall or a table, and individuals or small groups of students rotate and respond in writing to a prompt there that's on the poster sheet. And when I do this workshop in live there in Alaska, I have poster paper all around the room to talk about the pros, the cons, the formats of reflection, and I turn all of you teachers loose to do graffiti. When I had a doctoral student, I was teaching a graduate course on community engagement, and my doc student asked if he could take the lead one night in class. And he had these weird shaped pieces of paper up on the wall all around the room with these odd, post-Sputnik, land grant, HBCUs and all this, and he turned the grad students loose as they wrote and responded to the prompts. And when they were all finished, he brought them up and put them up on the whiteboard, and they were a jigsaw puzzle. That's why they were shaped funny. And he was giving us the picture of higher education in the United States. And I thought that was so clever and so effective of checking in to see how much we already knew about these salient points of higher education. When I was first at St. Mary's College in California, I'm with 25 faculty members, and I put around poster paper all around the room that said, service learning is not. Best practices over here, things to avoid. And I turned loose 20 PhDs in the room as they did graffiti responses. What was important was we took those graffiti entries and distilled them down to an operational definition for the college and a rubric for designating courses as service learning. And it came out of the graffiti exercise. Here's some other examples in a science class. What are the advantages of solar power and the disadvantages of solar power? Compare and contrast advertising like billboards versus sponsorship on the Iditarod Trail. You might invite your students to respond from various perspectives, like I'm the chairperson of an oil company, or the president of an environmental advocacy group, or perhaps I'm the representative of an indigenous group or a local business owner. And it'd be very interesting to see if the responses to those prompts change. Now we're getting new perspectives. Here's another example. What does steward mean? Which, by the way, would be a good one for preflection. What or how does a good steward act or behave or look like? What or how does a poor steward act or behave or look like? How does one learn how to be a good steward? Where might you find examples of people being good stewards on the Iditarod Trail? And here's the really good question for all you teachers. How could our class be a steward of the Iditarod Historical Trail? Here's some factors to consider. It can be simply listing ideas or examples, maybe feelings, without necessarily listing pros or cons. Like I said a while ago, what is service learning? What is not service learning? Then later, you can have deeper development of the ideas in a journal or other methods using the 3-2-1 scoring method. It could be responding to a thought, a quote, experience, a piece of art, a song, a poem. This provides a safer venue for shy students to be actively engaged in the reflection activity. Here's some assessment ideas. How might you go about assessing graffiti responses, if at all? Or do you see graffiti as really just a nice catalyst to stimulate active dialogue and reflection? What are your thoughts? Is this something you want to assess, or are you going to just kind of turn your students loose? Anybody want to share their thoughts?
I'm just wondering, how is this different than brainstorming? when
It's
you're-
not. It's just brainstorming up on a piece of poster paper. But it's still reflection if it's the intentional consideration of an experience in light of a learning objective. So your graffiti is tied to the term, the skill, the activity that you're going to be doing in the service learning. So it's brainstorming. That's one way to look at it. Good
But
question.
I think it's a little bit different though, because you get to see other students' responses. It's all there. And so they can kind of build off of each other and, you know, kind of get more ideas, the synergy of, you know, more than one person's ideas being there in view.
Yeah, when I'm doing this workshop with you in the room and I'm turning you loose, I play the role of teacher and I stand back and I watch certain people write things like the shy student, and I kind of take note, and then I begin to facilitate the conversation. Gee, someone wrote a really interesting thing over here. I wonder, and I read it. Could somebody elaborate on that? And it allows that shy student to shine and to speak up. And then students start piggybacking, and kind of a threaded conversation, a threaded discussion ensues. So the beauty of the activity is the conversation that ensues after you've turned them loose. Okay, anybody else? Okay, we're gonna move on then. In fact, we'll just skip this because I sort of alluded to that. I'm mindful of our time. We're gonna talk about the head, heart, and hands, which is based on the ABCs. So when I'm working with college students, I'm talking about affect, behavior, and cognition. When we're talking about our kiddos in K-12, head, heart, and hands is much more descriptive. It can be done in oral or written graffiti. It can be done in a journal. It can be done in graffiti, but it's a framework for a reflection that we can assess and give feedback as a teaching tool. Head is the cognitive connection to class content. Students must make an overt reference to the topic or term or skill that we're covering in class, all right? It's not, oh, I learned a lot. Thanks, I really enjoyed this. I learned, no. What did you learn about reflection? What did you learn about mitosis? What did you learn about the reconstruction error? Okay. Heart is the attitudes, emotions, and feelings. This is when we're allowing students to take some chances, take a risk, and share what they're feeling here. And then hands is reflecting on our behaviors or our actions, either in the past, what we're doing right now, or in the future. Here's a real life example from a 4th grade teacher in Salt Lake City. She was doing cross-curriculum planning of tying science, environmental studies, and math. And she took one of those little doggy kennels, those little steel things you put in your kitchen to keep the puppy from running around, and she put it over in the corner of the room, and the kids were bringing in plastic bags. And they were sticking the plastic bags in this space, and they were learning to measure volume, okay? That was the math. At the same time, they were learning about plastic bags. They were learning that the plastic is a petroleum-based product. They were learning about the litter problem with plastic bags, and on and on and on. So what she did, actually, she combined it with graffiti. I usually show this. She had a big piece of paper with the head on it. Over here, a big piece of paper with the heart. And over here, a big piece of paper with hands. And she had the kids go around and write, what have you learned about plastic bags? Heart, how do you feel about what we've learned or done in our project? Describe what you've done in the past. How would you use plastic bags in the past, and how might you change your behavior in the future now that we've done this project? Because they learned about landfills, pollution, and they could see how much space it was filling up. And in the course of their discussion, in the kind of now what, they came up with the idea of canvas bags. Now this creative, energetic teacher goes to the PTA, and the PTA starts making canvas bags with the school logo on the side. They go to the local supermarket and start getting a 5-cent discount when families were bringing canvas bags to the supermarket. Here we're doing cross-curriculum planning, critical reflection of head, heart, and hands, and then the kids became good civic citizens and started making a difference, and they could see the impact they were making based on what they were doing with collecting trash and plastic bags. We have to explicitly teach the head, heart, and hands to the students because they don't intuitively know how to reflect on these dimensions. And you could consider giving a sample. There are pros and cons to that because sometimes kids get into a formula and think it has to be done exactly this way. But their cognitive responses, the head responses, help you determine just how much they're getting and the understanding of the critical concepts. And over time, we've discovered the head, heart, and hands is a teaching tool as well as a learning tool, as I'm going to demonstrate here. Here's an example closer to home. We've been doing campsite restoration along the trail. Head, what are some of the things you've learned from our project? Heart, how do you feel about what we've done or what you've learned and why? Hands, what things have you done in our project that you will continue to use or do in the future? So there's an example that could be written or a class discussion, small group, graffiti. See, the format can start to change a little bit. Here's another example that's more personal development, maybe for older students. Name a part of the trail or a political, historical issue associated with the trail that reflects you and your personality. Or what are some of the emotions you encountered along the trail, and how do these reflect emotions you encounter in life or school? What are some of the specific attitudes or way you approach the work or hike on the trail, and how can you carry these over in life? This is when we're talking about the peaks and valleys of life, the effort and the hard work, but the gratification that we get after doing that hard work. I've seen some really creative uses of the head, heart, and hands in this way. Now, assessment. First, there's no right or wrong answer when the kids are expressing their feelings in the heart. We do not penalize for negative feelings. If the kids say, I hated this, tell me why. Why did you hate it? Why? I was scared. Okay, thanks for sharing. What scared you? Why did it scare you? What did we do differently? Okay, they have to articulate what they're feeling and why. And some kids are going to be uncomfortable with this. But good teachers know how to create safe space for kids to truly share their ideas. And it may be private in a journal or a piece of paper, not in a full classroom discussion. Second, in the head section, students must make overt references to content from the class. So again, here's where the 3-2-1 really comes in handy. 3 points possible for the head, 3 points possible for the heart, 3 points possible for the hands, gives you 9 points possible. And you can use that to calculate percentages. I use this scoring procedure in my college classes with all my ABC head, heart, and hand reflections. And my students have figured how to do this, but I had to model it for them. An alternative is just a dichotomous 1 or a 0. So there's 3 points possible. They either shared the head, heart, and hands, each one, or they didn't. Now, here's where it becomes a teaching tool, my friends. You can make comments that acknowledge their comments and feelings. You can also note that little or nothing was articulated and explain why some points were lost. And I'll give you an example here. Encourage students to respond to all 3 components of the head, heart, and hands, and give them a freebie. Tell them they can resubmit it by addressing the things that you've pointed out. So I might read Alex's reflection response and say, Alex, good job here. I'm so glad you enjoyed this. You told me how much this meant to you and how much fun you had, and that you overcame some anxieties and worries. And you also talked about how you actually did the trail maintenance using a Pulaski and a shovel, and you saw how the rain runoff worked really well. But I noticed you didn't tie it into something that we talked about in our science discussion earlier about measuring rain. I'm going to invite you to redo this and address the part we talked about in class, okay? And if you turn it in to me by Friday, I'll look it over again and I'll change your grade. And students are now seeing what they did right, what they did wrong. But as the teaching tool, if everybody's missing something, you go back and we need to revisit this. So here's some examples to give you a feel for how this works. This is an example from a high school in, I'm trying to remember where this was. I think it was Southern Arizona or Southern Utah. And this was a written reflection. And it was a sociology or a communications class. So this is what a student turned in. We spent last week reading and discussing cultural differences and behaviors. And I have to admit that I wasn't all that into it when we first started going over this stuff. And I even had a little trouble getting it. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me because I hadn't seen examples. Well, this week I was tutoring in the after-school program, and I worked with this little boy from the Navajo reservation. And I really started to see this in action, and I have a much better handle on this stuff. He didn't make any eye contact with me. He kept his eyes down. At first, I thought he was just shy or scared, or maybe a little of both. But then I realized he might have been showing respect. This was one of the things we read about, eye contact. Then when I asked him a question to check his reading comprehension, I expected a pretty basic, simple yes or no answer. Instead, he kind of went around and around with a lot of talking. At first, I thought he was just stalling or faking. Then I remembered how our class discussion about storytelling in some cultures, how setting up history and characters and time and location are all that important. And we white Americans tend to just cut to the chase with abrupt responses. So now I have a better sense of at least 2 cultural communication differences based on my service project. This really helped me because I responded to him differently. Had I not known about this stuff, I might have treated him differently or thought he was just weird. I know there are a lot of Native Americans around here. There's a reservation nearby, and I see them a lot. Now I'll act or treat them better the next time I see or talk to them in my dad's shop. Okay, head, cognitive connection to content in the class. Are you seeing examples of the student articulating concepts from class? Anybody want to say where you're seeing it? Even though you're not in this class, can you discern? Somebody chime in here.
The issue of eye contact with Native Americans, that's pretty common. And I didn't know that till I had read about it.
Okay, eye contact and the storytelling, the narrative in responding. So there's 2 concepts that were discussed in class. So that's the head. Is he talking about heart? Is he talking about his feelings at all? Where do you see it?
In his last, sentence.
Go ahead, Alex.
Just his last sentence. It looks like he's had a little bit more of a heart, a change of heart, perhaps, in his perception.
Not only a change of heart, but a change of behavior. He goes, so yeah. There's the hands. I will treat them better next time. So there's some heart and some behavior. That's what the hands is. Anybody else want to add something about head, heart, or hands in this?
I like the sentence, this really helped me because I responded to him differently. That's huge, I think.
See, that's behavior. That's the hands. That's where we go back to our early definitions and conceptualization reflection. Internalizing, making meaning. We're now saying that this kid not only learned 2 communication devices and cultural differences, but he internalized it. It made a difference. He made meaning, and that is wisdom. That is not just getting the right answer. He's internalizing it in such a way that it'll have meaning in his life. So, real quick, because I'm watching our time, how many of you, I can't see all of you. My gallery isn't, let me see if I can make this bigger. No, I can't. How many of you would give, like using the 3, 2, 1, how many would give a 3 to the head, or 3 or 2? Somebody just kind of chime out. What score? Okay, Alex is giving a 3. Brian, oh yeah, I'm getting thumbs up. Thank you, folks. So, 3s or 2s here. What about heart? How many would give some 3s to heart? Feelings. Maybe some 2s?
3.
Okay. And what about hands, behavior, doing something, application? Are we getting something here? Yeah, okay. Now, so you can see this is a fairly rich reflection. Let's look at the next one. I really like this project. It was a lot of fun. I felt good knowing I helped these old people. They're not as creepy as I used to think. My grandparents are dead, so I don't know about old people. This is the real deal. This is what somebody turned in. Are you seeing any head? Are we learning anything specifically about old people? Probably not. Are we seeing feelings? He liked it. It was fun. He's not as creeped out. Okay. What did he do or she do? What's the hands? What's the application? Do we even know what happened here? Here's where the teaching comes in. Susie, I'm glad you like this project. I'm glad it was fun. And yeah, it does feel good knowing that you're helping people. I'm glad you found out they're not as creepy as you thought they might be. And I'm sorry you don't have, your parents to interact with. I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about what you did when you were with our senior companions. And I'd like you to make a connection to what we talked about in class when we were talking about seniors as elders. I'd like you to turn this in later this week and I'll adjust your grade. See how this became a teaching tool? But this is the kind of thing you may get, all right? So this is a quick brushstroke of head, heart, and hands and how we can use 3, 2, 1 as a teaching and learning tool. So I'm watching our time and I want to make sure we get to the next one. So I will quickly ask, have any of you started feeling the gears turning of how you might use head, heart, and hands? Can anybody pipe in real quick and say yes or no or? Okay, Carol's giving me a thumbs up. Anybody else? Okay. All righty. Let's talk about the what, so what, now what. This is really easy to use. The what is the topic or issue that's identified, defined, or discussed. The so what is the rationale or importance of that topic or an issue. And the now what is, what do we do next? We can do this in writing. We can do this in graffiti. We can do this orally. But we can take a term discussed in class or a reading assignment And then we can have them reflect on examples in their lives. If the term was sustainability, what is sustainability? We've read about it in class. How much of this are we seeing in our personal lives? We can have all these conversations. Then we get to so what? Well, what are the implications of doing sustainable activities or not doing sustainable practice? Does this matter? Why or why not? Then we might break into small groups to brainstorm some of the implications and then reconvene as a larger group, or we could turn them loose and do graffiti. The next one is a small group discussion on what do we do next? What might be some new policies or practice? How could we challenge some of our cultural norms about sustainability? What are some strategies to promote sustainability? And how can we apply this to the service learning experience? Now we go back to that 4th grade teacher in Salt Lake City, where she combined head, heart, and hands on graffiti paper and then did what, so what, now what. And using those 3 methods with a bunch of 4th graders, came up with canvas bags. They learned about measuring volume in math, and they learned about the issues of plastic bags for their ecology class. That's the magic of these workshops. When you see energized, creative teachers take an idea, a seed, they go, yeah, here's how I'm going to do that. And I'm going to tweak it. And I'm going to add this, my own personal touch to it. Okay. So we can combine what, so what, now what with journal entries or threaded discussions. We could pair students up and go through each of the 3 steps on whatever it is that we're looking at. Okay, here's some examples from the Iditarod Trail. What was the serum run? Why do we care about this? And now what are we doing or what has come out of that? Let's reflect on the contemporary dog sled race. What about advertising along the Iditarod Trail? What about it? So what? Now what do we do? Okay. Here's some assessment ideas. You could use a dichotomous scoring of 1 or 0 for each of the whats, or you could use Bradley's gradient scoring for each of the whats, with 3 points for a very complex, complete response, a 2 for adequate presentation, 1 for marginal, or 0 is like they missed it totally. Okay. Now, I want to show you an example that came out of something in West Virginia when I was working with teachers on the Appalachian Trail. But before we get there, our students tend to focus on the what, because they want to get the right answer. And nowadays, the answer is literally at their fingertips, right? And that's not necessarily learning. So exploring and articulating the so what is what requires critical thinking, and they have to support an idea or position, and that may weigh more in your assessing. Keep in mind, you may not agree with this response. Is it viable or correct? Okay. And I think a while ago, Carol was talking about this can be humbling as we start to reflect on our own lens and frames of reference. All right, so I'll show you an example here in a second. So here's an example about, should we have advertising billboards along the Iditarod Trail? What are the pros and cons? What could or would that look like? And what does that mean for the experience or the natural aesthetics, as well as the infrastructure and policy? And what are the next steps that we might take to make a policy decision? Who should be involved, when, and how? Some other examples. What are some of the plants or animals identified on a trail? And what is the impact on nearby communities of the race or the trails use? What if advertising was allowed on the Iditarod Trail? Answer is a member of the local Better Business Bureau or a member of the Historic Trail Alliance. All right, I want to show you this handout here, and you may have it there. This was an actual junior high students' response as they were talking about bottled water. in the context of plastic. All right, and this is what she wrote. Bottled water is super bad. We learned in class that bottles are made from oil, which makes us even more dependent on oil. Also, people don't recycle plastic bottles, so they just go into landfills or trash up the place. On top of that, they have to be shipped from other places, which uses fossil fuels, when all they need to do is to walk over to the faucet, which doesn't take any transportation by vehicles. Bottled water is not better for you. In fact, the plastic may be bad for you and cause cancer. And the last thing is cost. We pay much less for water from the tap than we do for bottled water. So why waste so much money on something we already paid for? Now, I use an aluminum water bottle and I just fill it up at the water fountain. I rag on my older sister who always buy bottled water at the 7-Eleven store. It makes me mad that a bunch of companies are making so much money on something we don't need. I get madder at the people who buy bottled water. I'm going to tell all my friends and relatives to stop buying it. That's one thing I can do. The environment, to help the environment, and that makes me feel good. I know I'm making a difference and I'm showing up my sister, and I think we should make bottled water illegal, and I'm gonna write a letter to my school newspaper about this. Whew, okay? So I'm sitting with a bunch of teachers in West Virginia who are doing service learning along the Appalachian Trail. And we're saying, okay, this is what, so what, now what? How would you score this? And collectively, we're all saying, wow, this student seems to understand what the issues are with bottled water. We know she knows where it comes from. She knows what the issues are. So I said, how many people would give the what's a 3? And nearly every hand went up in the room. A few hands went up for 2. And then I said, is she telling us why this matters? What difference does it make? And all the hands went up. Yeah. And then did she discuss now what? What is she going to do as a citizen? And everybody said, yeah. So I kind of took a straw poll. How many would give the student 9 points? How many would give 8, 7? And there's like 45 teachers in this room. And a gentleman in the back raises his hand and goes, I'd give her a 0. And there was this profound silence in the room. And I said, well, tell me more. Tell me why you would do that. And this is what the gentleman said to the room full of people. And I'm quoting, I don't like her politics. And I said, well, okay, maybe. So I gather you don't agree with her position on this. And he goes, no, I do not. And I said, well, let me ask you something. Let's go back to the objective of the intentional consideration in light of a learning objective. Does she know what plastic does in terms of bottled water? Well, yes. Does she exchange or articulate what the implications of the bottled water are, whether you like it or agree with it or not? Is she articulating that? And is it correct? Is it what was discussed in class? Probably. And does she articulate what she intends to do as a citizen to do it? Yes. And then he went, I guess she does get 9 points. And this was a teaching and learning moment where he hit the pause button, and we as educators had to reflect and consider and ponder how our lens and frame of reference influences how we teach, what we teach, and how we grade our students. And this was a magical, profound learning experience for a bunch of teachers. But you can see how powerful this particular reflection device of what, so what, now what allowed students to kind of conceptualize what they're learning, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they want to do. Comparison. Here's a what, so what, now answer. Today we worked on making rain trenches along the trail. This helps maintain trails so they don't get washed away. It was hard work and I got blisters on my hands because I lost my gloves. We dug a trench so the water flows off the trails. Well, that's pretty marginal. It's accurate and he or she is sharing, but I would probably give 1s or 2s in this and invite the student to elaborate a little bit more. Okay, I'm mindful of our time. So we're not going to be able to do this next couple of things because I want to check in with you now because we have like 6 minutes. All right. So open it up. I don't know if any questions have popped up in the chat box or you have comments or questions. I took a half-day workshop and hit you with it in 90 minutes or less. So let me ask you, do you have a better understanding of what reflection is or what it can be? I hope so. And so what? What difference does this make at all? You know? And what are you going to do with it? So I'm inviting you to share with me any takeaways or questions you might have in the remaining time that we have. Anyone? You guys are troopers to hang in there. And I know it's supper time.
Yeah, I like the open-ended nature of it. You get both the, we tend to prescribe the students, try to guide them in the specific direction we want to go, but this may surprise us in one way or another. So I like that.
Yep. Be prepared for surprises. I have been caught flat-footed with things out like, I never saw that coming. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can very much relate to that first reflection because I work in a native village. So we deal with a lot of those same things. And most of the time the kids, they do just want to give you the answer. We just want to give you the answer. So I can see using this to really draw them out a little bit more.
And the graffiti is safe because they can kind of doodle on the wall with a buddy, and then you kind of pull it out of them in a large group discussion and they start hearing other people, So yeah, good. I'm glad. Anybody else want to share a takeaway or an intention that they may have after hearing all of this?
I guess to me, it was just the use of, in your definition of a particular learning objective. And it was, I think that to me keys it in is how do you present this so that they keep that objective in mind when doing this?
Yeah. That, I love that definition because it brings it back to academics, and our role as teachers. Good. I'm glad. Thank you. Anybody else?
I also think that it can be very empowering to the student and to the teacher. It's feedback, and it's depending on how you interpret it and what you do with it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very empowering for the student. Like that girl who wrote about the water bottle. I mean, you could just hear and feel the intensity. And I had a college student who went to New Orleans with me writing in her journal. And my God, you should have seen the handwriting. I mean, the energy and the anger that was pouring out. She couldn't write fast enough to tell me how upset she was with herself and her power and privilege and blah, blah, blah. And oh my word, God bless her, for sharing all this with me. So anybody else? Okay. Well, I just want you to remember that reflection is like tending a garden. We have to care for it to see those little seeds take root and blossom and grow. You have the handout. There's my email and a phone number if you have any other questions. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to the powers that be. Thank you, everyone, for your attention, your participation. You have my respect and admiration for all that you do, especially in this time, crazy times. So thank you for letting me be a part of your day.
Thank you so much, Marshall. It was awesome, as always. I can't believe how much you packed into 90 minutes. I was like, he's going to get there. So really great stuff. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. And just a reminder that we've got 3 more sessions coming up in February. I think I told them to you. They are coming up on February 8th, Exploring Nature with Your Senses. February 16th, Using Outdoor Classrooms, focused on Wolverine Park. February 23rd, Nature Journaling. If you haven't already, you can sign up to get 1 UAA credit. And I think you've got all the information to do that. So we look forward to seeing you guys again soon. And Marshall, so great to get to see you this year. Thank you so much. Thanks.